Good morning and welcome to Why Books. I'm Barbara Grosz, Dean of the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, and it is a great pleasure to look out on all of these enthusiastic faces and to know there are hundreds more in Agassiz Theater. We come together to explore the future of the book, informed by a consideration of the book's long and fascinating history and evolution. Let me begin then by thanking those who have made this conference possible. In particular, the many faculty who contributed ideas and suggestions as we shaped the conference program itself. The Radcliffe Institute staff who ably managed the flood of interest and the overcapacity audience, and all those who hosted site visits yesterday. Please join me in thanking them. The idea for this conference emerged from a conversation I had soon after becoming Dean of the Institute with Professor Diana Sorensen, who was then Divisional Dean for the Arts and Humanities in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. As we talked about how the Institute might further and best contribute to the humanities at Harvard, the conversation turned to the book and our shared passion for books and an interest in what's happening to books that led us eventually to the question, just what makes a book a book? Much to my delight, soon after that conversation, Professors Blair and Leah signed on to be senior advisors to the Humanities and Arts at the Radcliffe Institute, and they took on the challenge of shaping an idea about the essence of the book into this magnificent conference program, asking not simply what, but why books? And what better place to address this quandary? The Radcliffe Institute is uniquely situated to grapple with complex, timely issues by drawing scholars and experts from across disciplines and around the world, bringing varied perspectives together in often surprising combinations. The Institute encourages innovation, and Professors Blair and Price took that to heart. They designed not simply a one-day conference, but 2 years of activities focused on various facets of the book, with today's conference as the focal moment. The overwhelming interest generated by this conference is evidence that the question of why books is on many minds. I have a personal interest in this question, not just as a bibliophile, but also as a computer scientist, having modeled communication in writing and speech. I have a particular appreciation for the rapid changes taking place in the production and consumption of books and the way these changes affect individuals and institutions. And I'm really lucky that as Dean of the Radcliffe Institute, whenever I have a tough question, I can bring together brilliant scholars from around the world to help answer it. Well, I expect you are as anxious as I to get the discussion started. So without further ado, let me turn the podium over to Leah Price, Professor of English and Harvard College Professor, and Ann Blair, Henry Charles Lee Professor of History and Harvard College Professor, with enormous thanks for their insight, creativity, and enthusiasm, and for leading us in exploring, appreciating, and understanding the history and future of the book. Leah and Ann.
Thank you, Barbara, for that generous introduction, and thank you, more importantly, for encouraging me and Anne to plan this conference and for so generously supporting the whole year of experimentation that led up to it. There's an anecdote that may well be apocryphal about a certain Reverend Hackman who died in 1874 after spending the last 36 years of his life as a cataloger at the Bodleian Library. After his death, it was discovered that one volume was missing from the otherwise comprehensive catalog that he had been preparing. And the explanation for this missing entry turned out to be that the volume in question had spent the past 36 years under the buttocks of the Reverend Hackman, who was too short to reach the desk at which he was preparing the catalog. This is, of course, a parable. We use books every day, whether to sit on them or even sometimes to read them. But the very ubiquity of print can lead us to take it for granted. Books constitute such basic tools for knowing the world that we sometimes forget to see books themselves as objects of knowledge. The number of people crammed into this gym today and into the simulcast space suggests that in the digital age, the page is becoming harder to look through. This conference is about the future of the book, but also about the book of, or books of the future. What new devices and interfaces will take over the functions, often conflicting, often discontinuous, that the printed codex has filled at different points in its long and also discontinuous history? It seemed to me and to Anne Blair that the Radcliffe Institute is the perfect place to ask this question because Radcliffe is an institution that straddles intellectual, disciplinary, and institutional divides. Any reflection on the book must involve not only historians and literary critics, but also legal scholars to think about intellectual property, computer scientists to think about emerging digital platforms, economists to think about the publishing industry, historians of science to think about the tools of knowledge, of which the book is only one. But this conference also aims to cross the border that divides academics in all of those fields from the larger world, whether of authors, publishers, designers, and others involved in book production, or of librarians, curators, and others who are devising creative ways for distributing and archiving content in the digital age. And that second constituency, of course, also has a historical link to the history of Radcliffe, given that this is traditionally a set of feminized intellectual professions. For all of these reasons, we organized a series of pre-conference site visits. And again, apologies to those of you who tried to sign up for those and were turned away at the door, to bring participants into spaces normally closed to the public. A hand press, a paper conservation lab, a digital archiving facility, rare book libraries, and the list goes on. I had the privilege yesterday of attending one of these sessions at the Weissman Preservation Center, a session on paper conservation, whose hands-on format reminded me very vividly that although we think of reading as an out-of-body experience and of books as virtual, in fact, books survive thanks to the hands-on work of readers and of others. If you look at the stunning room that we're in today, this room is, of course, no longer used as a gymnasium. It's been replaced by a new athletic facility a few blocks down the road that has state-of-the-art stairmasters and treadmills and so forth. And the rings and ropes up on the track are no longer being used. But if you walk across Radcliffe Yard to that other most beautiful Radcliffe space, the Schlesinger Library, you will find that the books there, unlike the ropes and rings on the track here, are still in use daily by readers. And the fact that those objects are still used and usable testifies not to the stability or immutability of books, which in fact change continually over the course of their life cycle, thanks in part to the wear and tear of human hands, but rather because curators and catalogers and librarians and others are constantly working to renew the books, to make them usable and knowable to new generations of scholars and readers and other lovers of books. On that note, I will hand over to my co-organizer, Anne Blair, and thank you once again for making this conference such an extraordinary success.
Thanks. I learned about all kinds of things in the 2 site visits I was able to visit yesterday. For example, as Leah was pointing out, the material difficulties, not just of curating paper books, but also of curating digital texts. But we realized that the site visits involved those pesky constraints of space and time. And if you weren't able to attend a visit you were interested in, we're delighted to report that each visit had a designated blogger who will write up a brief report offering a virtual glimpse of the visit, which you'll be able to reach through the Radcliffe website in about a week's time. Furthermore, today's talks are being blogged too, though not in real time, and most of them are being videotaped and will be posted to the Radcliffe website in a few weeks' time. So warm thanks in advance to the bloggers who are scattered among you. Yes, here for the bloggers. Thank you. Today's conference, though, takes the more usual format of panels of speakers and question sessions. The panels were conceived thematically around some of the main functions that books have long served: storing and retrieving, circulating and transmitting, and reading and other uses. Leah's story about the Reverend Hackman reminds me that I used 2 volumes of the Routledge History of Philosophy to boost up my computer screen for ergonomic correctness. But in noticing this, I also realized that last week I could have used those books to answer a student question if they hadn't been occupied in this way. Books aren't just any old, solid, regular objects. Thanks to ink and paper, they carry texts. Books are remarkable devices for storing and retrieving texts. You can leave them alone for long periods of time, centuries in the case of early medieval manuscripts of the ancient classics rediscovered by the Humanists during the Renaissance, and then you can start retrieving from them right away, barring paleography and language issues. My large collection of 3.5-inch diskettes, however, from just 15 years ago is now completely useless, and maybe I should be using them to boost my computer screen. So even within a lifetime, electronic texts have to be regularly upgraded to new software and hardware in order to remain accessible. Does this mean that in the future we'll lose texts that we don't keep in active use? Books are also remarkable devices for circulating and transmitting texts across space. No region-specific codes can be added to them to prevent them from opening, but of course plenty of regulations, commercial, governmental, religious, have shaped their movement across space and cultures. And finally, books are read, and in different ways depending on their format, arrangement, and contents. Some we want to browse or to use to look something up in. Others we want to read through, whether with discipline and hard study or with impatient relish. And all these habits we want to carry over into new electronic formats, even as those formats induce us to form new habits. The number of people Leah and I would like to thank for their contributions is so long that we would have committed it to writing. Listed on your program are the members of an advisory committee, which met early in the planning process and gave us great suggestions, and the names of the many site visit leaders who bravely volunteered to create programs in this new experimental format. But some people are not listed on the program, like the book not included in the catalog, and those are the people who made the program and all the arrangements for this event with great resourcefulness and care. Phyllis Strimling, Director of Academic Events Management, and Becky Wasserman, Director of Academic Engagement Programs at the Radcliffe Institute, and their colleagues, Alison Black-Foley, Anna Chesson, Maura Madden, and Deborah Smith. They are experienced at running academic conferences, but this conference presented a number of special challenges, and we are extremely grateful to them for making it all seem effortless nonetheless. Thank you. We invite you to stay after the end of the conference this afternoon for a reception in the building next door, in the Agassiz building, and more informal conversation, one of the perks of a Radcliffe Institute conference. But now I'll hand the proceedings over to Nancy Cott, Jonathan Trumbull Professor of American History at Harvard, Director of the Charles Warren Center of American History, and of the Schlesinger Library at the Radcliffe Institute, who will introduce our opening conversation.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Anne. Can you hear? It looks like this one's live. Delighted to see this very full audience. And our two speakers are just getting seated. We have on this opening panel two speakers who might seem at first glance to be worlds apart. Robert Darnton is best known and highly esteemed as a historian of 18th century French culture and politics, whose keen eye and fertile mind have been focused on the past in those endeavors. Stuart Shieber is best known and highly esteemed in computational approaches to language and communication, uniting in his work theoretical computer science, computer systems, psycholinguistics, and artificial intelligence, things that we think of as very much future-oriented. Yet they share a great deal in their common efforts to provide open access to scholarly knowledge. Both of them have been leaders and advocates aiming to prevent commercial gatekeepers from putting cost barriers in the way of the instantaneous access to scholarly knowledge that current electronic media technically allow. The specialties of these two speakers sketch the large spectrum from past to future that is occupied by the topic of today's conference on Why Books. I can't imagine a better way to begin. Now, you have brief biographies on the program, so I'll just say a few words about each of our two panelists in introduction. Robert Darnton, who's going to speak first, is the Carl Pforzheimer University professor at Harvard University and director of the University Library, and an internationally recognized scholar on the history of the book and the literary world of Enlightenment France. He's the author or editor of 24 books. Perhaps his most famous title is The Great Cat Massacre and Other Episodes in French Cultural History. And two of his recent titles are The Devil in the Holy Water, or The Art of Slander, from Louis XIV to Napoleon I, and very much on point for us today, The Case for Books, Past, Present, and Future. How he manages to write so avidly while carrying the burden of the Harvard University Library, I'll never know. But he has a new book coming out next month, another evidence of his long-term interest in the literary underground. This is called Poetry and the Police, Communication Networks in 18th century in 18th century Paris. And it shows how news could go viral by oral communication long before YouTube. Stuart Shieber is the James and Virginia Welch Professor of Computer Science at Harvard and the faculty co-director of the Berkman Center for Internet and Society. He has gained honors both inside and outside Harvard. In 2001, he was awarded the Harvard College Professorship, which is the top honor given here for excellence in teaching. And among outside honors, he was named a presidential faculty fellow by the National Science Foundation. He also had the honor of being a fellow here at the Radcliffe Institute just a couple of years ago. Although books are not the typical output of a computer scientist, Stuart Shieber is the author or editor of 5 of them, as well as at least 30 articles. And he is also the director of the Office for Scholarly Communication here at Harvard, which spearheads campus-wide initiatives to open, share, and preserve scholarship. And that office runs DASH, which is the university's central open access repository, and the Library Lab, which offers opportunities for individuals to make original contributions to the way libraries work. Now, each of our speakers has been granted 15 minutes only, and then we have a mere 10 minutes for questions, which we hope to pack fully in this way. Each of you has a card given to you with your program. I think they're all pink or various colors, and use this card. Yes, that's what it looks like. Use this card on which to write your question. There will be people in the hallways picking up your cards. They will hand them to me, and I will cleverly amass them and use those cards as the questions which will be asked to our two speakers. So, let's begin.
Thank you, Nancy. It's a delight to be here. It's true, as you said. Can you hear me all right? Since this is a conversation, I'll just stay seated. That Stuart and I are different, but we make up a team, and we've been working as a team for more than 3 years now. Stuart,
10 feet away.
Yeah, we're next door to one another in Wadsworth House. You could say that as a historian, I tend to look at the past, and that Stuart, as a computer scientist, peers deep into the future. Actually, that's a little too simple. Stuart loves books. He reads them all the time. I myself am involved in all kinds of electronic experiments. And I think that the differences between us illustrate the argument I'd like to try to make, moving real fast. The argument is that old books and e-books do not represent opposite and, if you like, contradictory extremes of some kind of spectrum along the lines of communication. I want to argue that they are, in fact, more complementary than contradictory, that they are allies rather than enemies, and that the way this alliance is being formed tells us a great deal about the period in which we are now living, which, of course, is a period of transition from a world that was predominantly analog, dominated by the printed word, to a world that will be predominantly digital, although we don't know what its dimensions are. So I'd like to try to illustrate this argument by 2 episodes that actually happened to me moving fast. The first one took place a very long time ago when I was a freshman at Harvard. I'd heard that you could actually go into the rare book library, Houghton, even if you were only a freshman and asked to see some rare books. I'd also heard that Houghton had Melville's copy of Emerson's essays. So I took my courage in my hands. I walked into Houghton, and sure enough, in a few minutes, there was Melville's own copy of Emerson's essay sitting on the desk in front of me. I began reading, trying to imagine reading Emerson through Melville's eyes. And when I came to the essay on prudence, I ran across some terrific marginalia. There was a passage by Emerson in which he was describing the world soul hovering above the globe, even over Cape Horn, and demonstrating that suffering and difficulties were epiphenomenal. Well, Melville came upon this passage. He put a big X in the margin next to it, then an X at the bottom of the page, and he wrote, "To someone who has sailed around Cape Horn as a common sailor, what stuff this is." Just last year, as a director of the Harvard University Library, I was able to help design, actually with Blair's help, a particular program on the history of reading, which belongs to something we call the Open Collections Program. The idea is to bring together all sorts of sources, rare books, images, and so on, from our 73 or so libraries that fit around a particular theme. It could be women at work was the first one, immigration, epidemics and disease, scientific explorations, our Islamic heritage, and now reading. Well, one of my happiest hours was making sure that Melville's copy of Emerson appears in this electronic program, which is now available online for free everywhere in the world, and that which contains hundreds of thousands of pages. My point is simply that we're trying to take our rare books, our old books, and make them available in the new medium, which is electronic. Anecdote number 2, that concerns the rather embarrassing business of being an archival historian if you belong to the older generation. In my generation, there were no copying Xerox machines. Microfilm existed, but it was too messy. We went into the archives with index cards and pencils. We would open boxes of manuscripts, read through them, take notes on the index cards, trying to copy out passages that seemed important and to summarize documents in our own words. And then we would class the index cards in shoe boxes. It wasn't actually a bad system, but it's very embarrassing if you're still using it, as I am, when around you everyone is going tap, tap on laptops, and not just laptops, but also digital cameras, because you don't need a Xerox machine anymore. You go in and you just click away, reproducing on your own camera all kinds of documents. Well, I found this rather hard going to be such a dinosaur in such a place, but the manuscripts I was studying most recently belong to a genre called chansonnier. They are scrapbooks of songs that were written in the 18th century, especially around 1750, concerning current events. It turns out that everyone in Paris is composing new words to old tunes, because Parisians carried around in their heads a repertory of tunes that served as mnemonic devices. So you can, when something occurs, very easily invent a new verse, and soon all of Paris is singing it. Fortunately, these manuscripts, these scrapbooks called chansonniers, had hundreds, even thousands of them, and you could follow current events as they were being sung in the streets of Paris. I found this utterly fascinating as a way to get at a missing dimension in history, namely sound. But then I faced a problem, having studied a particular political crisis in 1749, the detective work of the police as they arrested one singer after another, put him in the Bastille, interrogated him, revealed wonderful information about how communication actually operated orally in 18th century Paris, and then eventually let him loose. What was missing to it all, however, was the music, because the scrapbooks always say, sung, they give the text, and then sung to the tune of, and then you get the title of a tune, something like La Béquille du Père Barnabas, that no one has ever heard of today. So what, I asked, did the music sound like? Not an easy question until I wandered into another manuscript collection in the Department of Music in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and there were keys to the songs. That is, you could look up the title or the first line of a song, and then you had the musical annotation. Well, a friend of mine who used to be an opera singer and is now a cabaret performer in Paris, Hélène de Lavaux, agreed to record all of these songs, and they are now available online. I mean, not thousands of them, but a dozen or so that are connected with the particular political crisis that I was studying. So I have now written this up as a book, the book that Nancy kindly mentioned. It's an ordinary book published by the Harvard University Press, but at the end it has a program of the songs, and the reader can therefore follow the lyrics in English translation and in French while listening to the songs on some kind of computer contact. So it's possible, I think, thanks to modern technology, to recapture a dimension of the past that is largely missing: oral transmission sound. Now, this is not actually an advertisement for my next book, although it may sound that way. It's an attempt to illustrate this argument, namely that the new electronic media and the old forms of research belong together. It's, if you like, a very microscopic and maybe trivial set of examples, but there is a macroscopic dimension to all of this, and that's the happy ending with which I would like to close. 2 weeks ago, we had held here at the Radcliffe Institute a meeting of top people from foundations, from the cultural institutions of Washington, computer scientists, and others, to discuss the possibility of creating a national digital library. The idea is to digitize the holdings of the great research libraries in this country, to create a massive database, and to make this material available free of charge to not just the American people, but the world. Now, this could seem like a very utopian, futuristic plan, but we left feeling that we can do it. It is actually feasible, and we are now on the way to creating something I think that will be greater than the Library of Alexandria, a new kind of library which will combine the old books and the new media. It's a long story. I'd better stop there to leave time for Stuart, but if you have questions about this enterprise, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Well, thank you. I'm a computer scientist, so I need my crutch, which is my laptop here, to show some slides. Let me start by saying it's really a privilege to be able to speak with you and to share the stage with Bob Darnton, my office mate in Wadsworth, and Nancy Cott. And it's particularly nice to follow on Bob's discussion about the complementarity and consistency of books and e-books. And I think that's an important point. But in the spirit of engendering maybe some conversation, I actually want to put books and e-books in a little more competitive context and really look into this question of the difference between books and e-books and where each can be thought of as actually preferable to the other. In what ways are books preferable to e-books and vice versa? In a certain sense, I want to take the title of the conference, Why Books, seriously, especially in the context of the question, why not e-books? And I take this latter question not as a rhetorical question, but an honest question, an open question. The issue of books versus e-books is, of course, extremely complicated, but I'll take my role to make an attempt at least at a clear claim, be clear-cut, and I'll state it baldly, whether or not I actually believe it, if for no other reason than to initiate discussion. So let me start by the point that we have to note that there are clear differences between books and e-books, their complementarity notwithstanding. Here's a short cartoon. I have a short cartoon here based on the book It's a Book that demonstrates the point. How many people have heard of the book It's a Book? A few of you. Good.
What do you have there? It's a book. Do you scroll down? Nope. I turn the page. It's a book. Can you blog with it? No. It's a book. Well, can it tweet? No. Can it text? Can it Wi-Fi? Does it need a password? No. Can it do this? No. It's a book. Are you going to give it back? No, but I'll charge it up when I'm done. You don't have to.
Eileen Smith.
So I should mention that It's a Book is actually a book. I don't get any royalties, but I recommend it to you. Don't have to charge it up when you're done. So clearly there are differences between books and e-books. What do these differences mean about the future of books? Some people have said e-books will kill books, as often happens with technological breakthroughs. The Polaroid photograph is, for all intents and purposes, dead because the functionalities of the Polaroid camera provided were completely dominated by the digital camera. Not the first digital cameras, but eventually after the technology matured a bit. But technological breakthroughs don't always kill predecessor technologies, despite often dire predictions. You may remember in 1982, Jack Valenti, who was president of the Motion Picture Association of America, famously predicted the end of the film. He testified before Congress, "I say to you that the VCR is to the American film producer and the American public as the Boston Strangler is to the woman home alone." I've shown on the slide here the annual domestic gross box office numbers for the last 10 years. Last year totaling over $10 billion. So much for this will kill that. What about e-books and books? Will books go the way of the Polaroid or the way of the film? Do e-books provide functionalities that dominate those of books? Well, let's look a little bit at what people have said we'll take as an example, since the Kindle was launched. There have been a lot of articles comparing the Kindle in various ways to books. Here's some excerpts from a New Yorker review of e-book devices by Nicholson Baker, a longtime friend of the Harvard library system. Let's start with the first. He complains about the Kindle hardware's e-ink system for display, which is extremely power efficient, but suffers from contrast problems. And furthermore, page turning is quite slow, and it's accompanied by a short flash when the screen turns dark, something like this. So many of you have Kindles, and you're reading something that looks like this. Personally, that would drive me nuts, but useful to a certain extent. The Kindle contrast ratio is about 6:1. Offset printing generates contrast ratios that, in comparison, are effectively infinite. Now, this is a serious problem with the Kindle, but it's an example of a contingent, not an intrinsic difference between books and e-books. We have current LCD screens with contrast ratios on the order of 50,000 to 1, and refresh rates faster than human perception, and I'd expect that non-backlit screen technology will improve over time to match this performance. So contrast ratio, although at the moment it's problematic, in the future, probably not so much of an issue. And then other complaints in Nicholson Baker's article, beyond the contrast problems, he talks about the availability of books. The Google Book Scanning Project estimates that humanity as a whole has produced a total of 174 million books. Harvard University Library System has something like, I think, 17 million volumes, but Amazon only makes available Kindle editions of about 700,000 books, not even 1 million books. Again, this is not an intrinsic problem of e-books, since more books can and have been scanned. Google itself has scanned over 12 million volumes, I think well over, by now, 12 million volumes. And in fact, of the 25 enumerated deficiencies that Nicholson Baker talks about, there's no jewel in the crown, no remains of the day, and so forth. 9 of them have already been invalidated. That is, they're actually available in the Kindle store now. And so forth. He talks about resolution, color, inability to transfer books from one person to another, speed, and so forth. If we want to gauge whether books dominate e-books or vice versa, I think it's useful to be a bit more systematic than Nicholson Baker and most other commentators have been. So I want to go through a bit of an exercise in that way. On this slide, I've listed some 36 functionalities that books and e-books provide, categorized into groups, as to whether they have to do with the physical properties of the object, the reading process, navigation through the content, markup, as in, for instance, Melville's annotation of Jonathan Edwards, accessibility under different conditions, business and legal constraints, preservation aspects, and other ineffable properties of books. There's no possible way I could go through all of these. I'll just look at a couple in a little bit of detail. But first I want to note that ebooks differ from books in one overarching and important way that ramifies in this categorization. Ebooks disentangle two aspects that are tied together in books: the book as a physical object and the book as an abstract object, that is, content. So some of these functionalities of books on the slide are functionalities of books qua physical objects, and others of books qua abstract object. For instance, the weight or the resolution are physical properties, whereas the ability to transfer to another person is a functionality of a book as an abstract entity. With ebooks, these two aspects are disentangled because, as you can see in the following way, the ebook itself, the thing you license from Amazon for $9.99, is distinct from the ebook reading device, the physical object which you purchase from Amazon for, these days, somewhere between $140 and $380. So you can tell they're distinct because they have different price tags, among other ways. And the book functionalities overall break down into ebook reader functionalities and functionalities of ebooks proper. So if we look at just a couple of these ebook functionalities, book functionalities, and how they get demonstrated in ebooks, summarizing wildly, you'll note that on this slide I show that in the Kindle, the codex has it all over the Kindle, basically, in all of these areas. If we turn to some, and I'll skip the discussion of poor Jason Gavronsky, who sued Amazon over the remote deletion of his copy of 1984 from his Kindle, thereby showing one of the deficits of the Kindle in the kind of business legal aspect. And I'll skip over this issue of ineffables. But in all of these areas, ebooks or ebook readers are inferior to books. And if you go through this exercise systematically, you can map out exactly where ebooks are preferable and books are preferable. Here was my list of the individual functionalities, and here I've color-coded them for which ones the codex is preferable, those are shown in red, and for which ones the Kindle is preferable in blue. So you'll notice a couple of things. First, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes the Kindle fares well, other times the codex. But also some of these, but overall, the Kindle, I have to say, doesn't fare very well. Not a lot of blue on the slide. But some of these comparisons may be contingent in that they rely on the particular aspects of the Kindle and its reliance on the current state of technology. So we can go through the same exercise and extrapolate a bit to the future of the ebook reading device of the future, and things change a bit. And again, I'll skip the detailed discussion, but here's the, we can similarly color code this little diagram with this extrapolated future ebook and take a look at which properties, and here I've done that, which properties, which functionalities the codex is preferable and which the future ebook is preferable. And now things, I think, get a little bit more clarified. You'll note that the functionalities that have to do with the ebook reader itself, the book as a physical device, the ebook seems to have an edge, whereas those properties that have to do with the ebook as an abstract object, still the book seems to be preferable over the ebook. So here, in the interest of making a statement that's clear-cut, if a bit paradoxical, is my conclusion as to which is better in an intrinsic sense, not contingent on current technology, books or ebooks. And that is this. In the future, we're extrapolating, ebook readers will be preferable to books, but books will still be preferable to ebooks. I think that accurately captures the expectation for the future. Now, I've run out of time, so I can't explain what this will actually mean for the future of the book and its availability and how it will change.Maybe we can discuss that during the question period. Thank you.
If you have questions, please jot them quickly on your cards, and so I can have them up here. I think, oh yes, mine is working. Well, we do have a first question, Stuart, that maybe will enable you to proceed with what you didn't get to, because someone wanted to know, what are your thoughts, but of course this includes you too, Bob, what are your thoughts about Kindle's recent lending services announcement?
Well, so part of the issue with ebooks is there's a certain sense in which you can't buy an ebook, you can only rent it, and that actually is, I think, a deep issue, and this gets at the Jason Gawronski case and other cases, by the way. So he had a particularly poignant in his case because Amazon ended up turning a purchase of 1984 into apparently a lending experience for him. But that actually has happened in other cases as well, with cases of Harry Potter books being deleted from people's Kindles unknowingly, books by Ayn Rand. I'm not clear what the theme is here of the authors that end up getting deleted. But,
so suddenly appearing without warning, or what about
yes,
books with Ayn Rand?
Because of rights issues. So they decided, we sold somebody this book, but we didn't have the right to, so we'll just take it back.
Oh.
And it just disappeared. And a lot of people didn't realize that Amazon had this power to do this. And there's a certain sense in which it's intrinsic to ebooks that there's this power, because one of the big differences that I didn't get to books and ebooks is books are directly interpretable without any aid. Well, I mean, if you have poor eyesight, you might need some glasses, but the exception proves the rule. But ebooks inherently require some device to enable their interpretation, so you're at the mercy of the device maker at all times. But I didn't get to your question, but Bob will talk about the lending aspect of
about
Amazon.
lending. Should I talk about lending?
Do you have some thoughts on that?
Real fast. Lending can also work in the opposite direction. Brewster Kahle is digitizing books on a massive scale that fall within copyright restrictions. But he feels that he can escape from being sued for breach of copyright because he simply lends the digital copies, and then those copies self-destroy after a certain amount of time. So this is a way for Brewster to build up a digital library outside of the commercial dominance of Google.
Stunning. Well, here's an interesting question. I'll read it exactly as it is. To this point, you've both been focusing on the impact on reading. Can you both comment or speculate on how e-platforms of books will impact writing?
It's sheer speculation. I've written a couple of e-books myself, and also I've been involved in something called Gutenberg E, which is an attempt to build up a whole list of scholarly monographs that are different in nature from the printed codex because of the way they are designed and indeed read online. What's exciting about it is not just the ability to communicate sound, as I mentioned, and in many cases film and all sorts of other things, but also the ability of the reader to read not necessarily in a linear fashion, but, so to speak, diagonally, to jump from text to text, to use hyperlinks, to look up things, to have a dictionary at his or her hands, to explore things in different ways. Now, that kind of reading is something that most of our students do much of the time, but it's not the only kind of reading. And of course, there is a loss at the same time, the loss of what we often call cover-to-cover reading, which involves intense concentration over a long period. I think we're moving into a stage when different sorts of reading are coming into existence as a consequence of the media. And in fact, those of us who study the history of reading, like Anne and Leah, have actually discovered that this was always the case, that there were many different kinds of reading in the past. So the break maybe isn't quite as profound as it seems, but it is a break, and I think it's worthy of serious attention.
Stuart, do you want?
I'll leave it. help.
Well, there's a question here which actually is perhaps asking you to go on this question you've just begun, Bob, because someone wanted to know how you felt the current environment was changing the experience of engaging with texts, that is, in terms of the spectrum of passivity to interactiveness. And you were just suggesting that people have interacted with written texts, traditional texts, in a variety of ways over time. But is there a secular shift here from one thing to another, or is it from one variety to another variety of engagements?
Well, I think all of us know that our experience of texts is changing. But that's always been the case. It's so easy to announce revolutions, basic shifts, schisms in experience. One of the famous revolutions discussed by book historians is the reading revolution, which supposedly took place at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century. Myself, I'm a non-believer in the reading revolution. I think it was invented by a wonderful German scholar called Rolf Engelsing, and has been, to my mind, effectively refuted, but there have been important changes. So I think, this is what historians do. No need to tell you, Nancy. We look at continuity as well as change, and we often see interesting combinations of the two at work simultaneously.
Stuart?
Yeah, so I will say one thing about this, which is a little bit of skepticism on two grounds on this more interactive. I mean, obviously, reading is much more interactive. The web itself has caused that change. But first of all, from the point of writing, which was the previous question, we have platforms for enabling these kinds of nonlinear reading, but we still need to design things to be read in a nonlinear fashion. And it's not so clear to me that we really know how to do that well, and that it's not a lot more effort to do that well, and exactly how to enable people to do that isn't so clear to me. That's the first issue. And the second is that nonlinear, it's useful to talk about nonlinear reading, but of course, human cognition, the attention in human cognition is a linear phenomenon. So somehow all this nonlinear capability gets linearized when one reads, so or interacts with the whatever the replacement for the linear text is. So, and I think a lot of the worries that people have about this interactivity are based on this mismatch between the capability of doing all of this nonlinear presentation, and yet in the end it's going to get linearized somehow or other.
Yet isn't there a potential there, given that human nature is plastic, that the increasing availability of networked and nonlinear types of acquiring of knowledge and exploration will actually change that linearity that you say is characteristic of human intelligence?
Well, so there you have to
we got to get the evolutionary biologists here.
Yeah, or the psychologists or people who know how to do MRI studies of people when they're interacting with these things. But so anything is possible over evolutionary timescales, which are even larger than librarian timescales. For the foreseeable future, say the next few 100,000 years, it's probably going to continue to be the case that that attention is a linear phenomenon. Having said that, it amazes me that people are able to do something that I myself cannot do, which is to read linearly, listen to music, and type instant messages at the same time. There's a whole cohort
do they do all three
in the
well
population.
Is the question.
Although, apropos of what happens to your mind while reading on the screen, there's this new book by Nicholas Carr, some of you may have seen, and he argues that this sort of intermittent, flashy quality of reading actually digs pathways through the wiring of your brain, and the synapses are reinforced in such a manner that the way you think changes. And he cites all kinds of brain research to illustrate his argument. I'm not convinced, I must say, but we are in the midst of arguments as to the way reading actually happens, and we can understand it through brain science. It is possible, it's not yet proven, but it is possible that the way the brain reacts to reading online and the sort of intermittent quality of information may physically change us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, our time is up. We now have a 30-minute break. I'll ask you to be back in your seats by 10:30 for the next session of the conference. And let's thank both of our panelists.